movie played amazingly, right? It still rocks. They were laughing, and it's just the time, everything about it.
How many people feel it's dated?
Really not.
No, it's not.
No.
It's a romantic comedy in the classic structure of the post-war era, and the only thing different was that the lead guy was a nerd, and not Cary Grant, and it was more fun than a barrel full of monkeys, because one of the great gifts that actors get is to say great lines, and you submit to great writing, and you see it in Shakespeare all the time, and I was completely spoiled because I thought that that's how all movies were made. Ray Stark would say to you, do you want to star in a movie with Marsha Mason and Neil Simon that Herbert Ross would direct? And we would read it, and we'd rehearse for 2 weeks and make a movie that we loved making, and then we went on to the rest of our lives, and
Keep doing it.
and then it got awarded and praised and made money, and I thought that's the way it was. That's how it all works. Not. So it spoiled me terribly.
Now, did you really start, you moved from Brooklyn to here to LA, and you started to play it, acted like age 5?
9.
9.
We moved from-
How do you know at 9 that you want to act?
I don't know. There's, for a person who really prizes being articulate, I am pointedly inarticulate about the whys and wherefores of my ambition and my relationship to the art. And it was the only certainty of my life, and it was certainty, absolute, monolithic, unbroken, and it never, ever wavered. To the point that my friends that you know would take me out to lunch and say, you can't behave like this, they hate you. You're being blacklisted. And I said it was gonna make me a star. My friend said, how? I said, because they're gonna say, well, he's been turning down these 2-line roles and 4-line roles. Let's see what he does if we offer him this. And the parts that I got offered kept getting better and better, and I kept saying no, until finally I was being offered leads and pilots. And it was simply that I was in it for the long run. I was in it for the whole life. And I didn't want a particular role. I wanted a great body of work. And I knew I was in my apprenticeship years and that I could afford to work or not, pay for the privilege or not, and learn. And I would say to my friends all the time, if you got stardom right now, what would you do with it? Do you have the life experience to back it up? And so that I apprenticed on television and in the theater for about 11 years. And then I started to do features. And I went from being a pretty mediocre over-actor to a really good film actor almost overnight. Because if you see The Big Valley or Gunsmoke, the only Jewish Gunsmoke they ever did, you'd see a pretty terrible actor. But when I did Doody, I was not a terrible actor.
So, because for me, when I was like looking at your resume and I see that you did, you know, you worked with Lucas at the age of 26 and you did Jaws and Close Encounters with Spielberg at 27 or 8 or something. You won your first Oscar at 29 or 30. So to me, it seems like it was like this, but you're saying that you kept acting in television and plays until that point.
When I was 9 years old and we had just moved here from New York, I said to my mom that I wanted to be an actor, and she said, "Don't just talk about it." And I got up and I went to the West Side Jewish Community Center and I auditioned for a play, and I never stopped, ever. I was either auditioning or playing or in a class or in Theater West or the studio or something. And I didn't take 2 weeks off until I was 27. And I loved every minute of it. And so for me, my working career began when I was 9. And that's 20 years before anyone ever heard of me. And that was, and my job, my playing Theodore Herzl, the founder of Zionism,
Right.
at Temple Emmanuel, was as important as Diddy Kravitz or the Goodbye Girl. They were all important. And I learned from all of them. And I was in a theater group. You know Theater West? Theater West is 150 kick-around actors who work all the time, and you see their faces all the time. And I was in Theater West for, I was 15, I guess, when I first joined them. And I'm still in it. And I worked with some of the best actors in America. And what's her name? I have a friend who was in the group, and she said to me one day, "You like working with bad actors, don't you?" And I said, "Yeah." And she said, "Why?" And I said, "Because I'm better." And she said, "Well, one day you'll work with actors who are better than you, and you'll like that even more." And she was right. And I didn't believe her when she first said it. I thought, that's bullshit. But I did. Because one day I'm working with someone and I'm scrambling. I'm scrambling to keep up. And I realize this guy knows what he's doing here. And he was 30 years older than me. And I was one of the 3 rotating artistic directors, meaning I ran the commentary. And I remember one night, I must have been 18, and I was the uncrowned prince of Hollywood. Everybody knew I was going to be a star. Nobody knew who I was. And everyone knew that. Everyone knew it about Spielberg. Everyone knew it about me. And so one night at Theater West, I started to critique an actor who said to me, "I don't want to hear from you. Shut up. You're 16. I don't give a shit. I don't want to hear. I want to hear from other people." And he just put me in my place. And he had every right to do that. He also was denying the smartest actor in the world. So. But I was a peer. I felt no hierarchy. I was not afraid or intimidated by any actor or person in the profession at that time. We were all in it, in the thing, in the soup. And later on, I got intimidated by all kinds of people. But at that time, I was just coasting on my own inevitability. And I happened to be wrong, but blessedly, I didn't know it. I was in denial about how bad I really was. And in fact, I was far worse an actor than I believed myself to be. but I believed that I was one of the top. First, I believed that I was the best. Then I saw De Niro and I thought, well, maybe I'm one of two. Then I saw someone and I said, well, maybe I'm in the top 5. And by the time I was actually really, in my life, I knew that I was in the top 100. But that was pretty good. And I was very, inside me, I was very competitive with other actors, which is not a bad thing, because when you're competitive with another actor, it's not that you want to be better and be seen as better than him in the scene. It's that you make the scene work better and you work together better. Who works best with others? Works well with others. Richard Dreyfuss, he works well with others because you have to. Because film and theater are the most collaborative art forms, whether the director believes in auteurism or not. Hundreds of people go into making art in film and theater. And so you have to work with people. You can't impose your vision of every moment on the whole thing. No one can do that. And learning how to work with others, which means learning how to work with a bad actor and making him look better. And learning that I could learn from Robert Shaw a lot, because when he was sober, he was one of the greatest actors in the world. And I learned from everyone. And I learned from the mythology, all the stories that one hears that creates the golden age in anyone's head. I learned from those stories. Cary Grant wrote a book, and on the book cover it says, everyone wanted to be Cary Grant. Even I wanted to be Cary Grant, says Cary Grant. And he collaborated with himself. He created Cary Grant from the ground up. And
so did Audrey Hepburn, and so did all those old stars, yes.
And in the old days, Betty Davis would do a scene, walk directly to the phone, call Newman, who's the head of the music department at Warner's, and say, keep your fucking hands off my scene. Because she knew that they loved to underscore. And they were always underscoring her, and she didn't need underscoring. She was already underscoring herself. And I learned from those stories, There's a film with Lawton. Charles Lawton? Raise your hand. Those of you who don't, should. And Lawton was easily one of the ugliest men in the world and one of the greatest actors, and could actually do something that I think is totally unique to him, which was that he could find rhythm in prose. And there's a film he did with Renoir during the Second World War, where he plays this wimpy school teacher in Norway. The town is occupied by the Germans. And they set him up and he's going to be tried for murder. And everyone knows he's going to die. So there's this long, long speech. And all the camera does is sit there. And the only thing that he moves in the entire speech is, that's it. And you cannot take your eyes or ears or heart off of Charles Lawton. He is totally at peace, in harmony, and the only thing he moves are his thumbs. And it's a long, long speech in which, because he's just been told he's going to die, the characters liberate, and he tells Maureen O'Hara that he loves her, and he tells the schmuck that he's a schmuck, and he tells the town to rise, and they do. And that's the end of that German occupation of that town. And it's a collaboration between Jean Renoir and Charles Lawton. And everything about it, you learn something.
Can I ask you something? You seem to know so much about all the film history and movies way before your time. How important is it, do you think, for an actor to be steeped in that culture? And I know also you have an incredible respect for great dialogue from old movies.
Well, I think, first of all, it's a tragedy that you guys don't have what we had, which was that in the first generation of television, when before TV had made up its mind what road it was going to go down, they filled the airways with old American movies. Each network bought, CBS bought the library of 20th Century Fox, Paramount was bought by the KTLA group, NBC, and each one bought some American company. And you could watch the films that these companies made 24 hours a day, 13 times a week. And if you did that, which I did, and a lot of us did, you not only could see Citizen Kane 100 times, you became aware of the artistry of every department. The cinematography of James Wong Howe in black and white, the cinematography or the editing of so-and-so, or the supporting actors of John Ford's films. And you began to see a world, and that world was made more acutely brilliant by the boundaries created by censorship. You know, it was a very puritanical time, and you were not allowed to have an open-mouthed kiss. You were not allowed to show a double bed or a toilet. You were not allowed to reference sex at all. And the writers had to create all of that in dialogue. And so you could see a grade B film made at MGM with Lana Turner and Clark Gable, a really cheesy Western that is 10 times the wit and wisdom of anything written now. Because the tools of a film director, or the tools of filmmakers, are the same then as now, but in totally different order. In the old days, it was actors first, character, dialogue, story, and then editing, cinematography, special effects was last. And the director was actually called the brother-in-law in the 30s, because that was the job that was just given to the brother-in-law. It didn't require anything more than someone who could assemble things. And John Ford and others turned that into, that's like when Beethoven decided that he wasn't going to come in through the kitchen when he was asked to play at some great salon. All the musicians used to come in through the kitchen because they were just hired staff. And Beethoven said, and he came through the front door, changed the world. That's what happened. when actors and directors like Ford, Cary Grant, Brando, they just took the world and changed it and lifted this art form up.
And then the directors in the 70s also suddenly became the directors' meeting.
It was, you guys have a golden age. My youth is your golden age. And again, it spoiled me because I thought that's the way it was. Some young know-it-all would sell an idea to the heads of the studio, and they'd say, oh, okay, do it.
So let me ask you a question, because I once asked John Travolta, actually, because he was at one time a big star, and then he had the tougher period, and then he came back after the Tarantino. And you had this certain kind of period like this. First, Spielberg, Jaws, blah, 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 blah. Then a few movies don't work. Then you come back and you do Down and Out and you Tin Man and Stakeout, and every movie is again successful. And I asked him how he felt at the time, when he was a big star, and then,
He said he never felt it.
He said, I told myself he said, I was thinking that I'm the same talented man, but my career is not going well. And I wanted to ask you the same question, because those actors are going to go through a period where they think they're God, everything is going to come to them, and then suddenly it's not. And how do you handle all of that?
Well, first of all, I take credit for John.
Really?
Yeah, because John called me and said, there's this guy, Quentin Tarantino, and he's offering me this role. And I said, take it. And he was hemming and hawing. I said, John, if you don't take it, let me do it. And he did it. It became John Travolta. And so I take full credit for his stuff. And what happened to me was I became a low-down, dirty dog and misbehaved my way into failure. And then I had just married for the first time. And I said to my wife, I'm never going to be kicked out of Hollywood. I will walk out of Hollywood on my own 2 feet. And if turns out that I don't come back, I will become a teacher. My first wife listened to this, and unconsciously she took the bed cover and she just, as I was talking, she just went, covered herself with the bed covers and didn't want to hear it. But to me, it was all about protecting and respecting my instrument, which was my own moral character. And I'd already done some severe damage to my moral character. And there was a guy in Hollywood, Danny Melnick. And Danny Melnick was the head of Columbia, and he was an indie, and he was this and that, MGM, and he was a friend of mine. And one day he had a dinner party. And at the dinner party was Danny, my wife, myself, Jeffrey Katzenberg, and Jeffrey's wife. And that's it. And halfway through the dinner, I realized that Danny had decided to throw this dinner party to prove to Jeffrey that I was okay. And I became an actor for Disney, basically, and did, like 12 films. And I realized that it was a simple act of kindness on Danny's part. And he changed my life. And I told him I knew that. And when I left the business, I quit a film that he was the head of the studio. And he called me into his office and he said, do you know what you're doing? And I said, yes. You know how much this is going to cost you? Yes. Okay. And it cost me a huge amount and gave me my soul back. I was supposed to do all that jazz,
Wow.
and I gave it up, walked out of it, quit, because I knew that I wanted to live among human beings, among the human race. I did not want to be alone, isolated, and live in that niche of whatever you call it, where the solar system, there's an Al Pacino solar system and a De Niro solar system and
Right.
Nicholson solar system. I didn't want that. I am not built that way. And so I withdrew from that film and others and did other things like that.
Well, you taught in Cambridge, you,
I turned down the
Political
cover of
activist.
GQ. When I turned down the cover of GQ, everyone got the message because they knew nobody ever did that, and I did. And I really wanted to say, thanks for the 35 years, bye. And
so did Brando and so did other people too. I mean, when
Yeah.
you act for 35 years, sometimes you get tired of it like anything.
right,
I have a question for you, and then I'm gonna turn it to the students who wanna ask a lot of questions. A role like W, where you have to play Dick Cheney, not exactly your kind of politics, right? So how do you handle that as an actor, where you have to play somebody like that?
I'm always surprised at this question because no actor wants to be a serial killer, wants to be Charles Manson,
Right. You're right.
and actors love to play bad guys. And I would say, when asked, how could you play Dick Cheney or a
Yeah.
Democrat? I would say, well, there's a little Cheney in all of us. And the fact is that there was about a 5-year period where all I played were Republican bad guys. But that was just me as an actor playing a bad guy.
Yeah.
And the trick is that you don't wink at the audience and you don't say, it's not me, it's him. It's not me. And when you're looking at acting, that's what you see most, are actors playing the bad guy, and they're letting the audience know, I'm not really him. So the better actor is the one who says, I'll leave it to your judgment later on. I want to play as good a Dick Cheney as I can. And I don't want you to see the wink. And that's easier than you think, because there's a reason you're all actors. There's a reason why musicians are musicians and writers are writers. There are reasons for art to exist. And to simplify it, every actor has Hitler and Jesus inside him. And your obligation is to bring out the appropriate Hitler and the appropriate Jesus at the appropriate time. But you don't have to go very far to find Hitler or Jesus, because you've done it and you do it every day. And we all do. And that's what ennobles the profession, what ennobles the art, why it has existed for 500,000 years. You know, there are certain endeavors of man that don't exist that long, and art is boiled down in its essence to those that survive and communicate something necessary in their own unique way: music, dance, writing, and singing and acting. Each of them are divine. Each of them have a shot at affecting mankind in its own way. And the thing that makes acting unique is that of all the art forms, acting is the only one that does that. That can hit you so fast that you can, it's like someone can rip into your chest, take your heart out, throw it on the floor, throw it back into your chest in 1 second, and you burst into laughter, burst into tears, and only acting can do that. Music can affect you as deeply, but in another way. Writing in another way. Acting is immediate, and it's right there. And so when I do a play, I always ask that the lights above the audience be up just enough so that I can see them. Because when you see them, and you're in the groove, and you know you're in the groove, you can feel them. You can feel the audience, you can feel them on the here. You can feel their concentration. And when you make 900 people laugh, and I have been in a show where there were 17 brilliant comic actors. And there was one long scene where we were all in it together. And we made 900 people laugh so hard that it looked like cats in a bag. That their skeletal frame went one way and their brains went another, and they laughed so hard they didn't know what to do with themselves. And that is called a blessing. That's a mitzvah. Because what actors do is exactly what Shakespeare says. They give surcease from sorrow. We all walk around with so much sadness and grief and unhappiness and stress. And an actor lets you laugh. And God damn it, you're walking down Broadway, some woman walks over to you and says, "Are you Richard Dreyfuss?" "Yeah." "Thank you." That's all they say. They don't say that to their rabbis. They don't say that to their divorce lawyers. They don't say that to their neurosurgeons. They say it to actors, because actors are the only ones that can give that surcease from sorrow. And I say it to you because if you're going to devote yourself to this industry, which is quite capable of destroying you, you better be proud of yourselves and really know why and not kid around. You've got to know that all of this stuff which diminishes you is worth it, because in your life you will create a body of work to be proud of. And they'll know. And he'll know.
Wow. Yes.
You want me to stand here and ask it? No, right up here.
Where is the microphone?
Oh, sorry. Hi.
I think it's me.
First off, my dad's Martin Cove, and he sends his love to you. We saw you in The Sly Fox on Broadway many years ago, and it was hilarious. I think I was probably one of the people contorting and laughing. I had a question I wanted to ask you about what it's like to, I'm an actor myself and a director. My question to you is, what is that transition like from going from film and television to the theater, you know, having that instant gratification from the audience versus being on set and doing takes over and over and over again? Just kind of curious what that was like, if you could elaborate on that.
It's not that there was an event. I spent 10 years doing that. And when you are doing a film, what you don't what's not spoken of is you're really working alone. The people that are in the room with you are working. They're not your audience. And even the director has ceased really watching acting. They're watching the little,
Monitor.
what do they call that?
Monitor.
Video Village.
Yeah.
And Video Village, let me tell you, is the actor's enemy. Because you're not going to get any help from a director who can't see your expression because the image is so small. He's looking at the whole in Video Village. So what you're working for is your own satisfaction and the actor that you're working with. That's it. And then you finish your work, which is already out of sequence, so that there's no build. As in the theater, you have a build, and you go off and you do another movie or a theater or something, and a year later they come and say it's the premiere and ask you how you feel about this thing which you've totally forgotten about. Because it was a year ago, and your attachment to it, whether it was love or not, is faded. And so it's in comparison, and I'm a hedonist in that way. I want gratification. I want a reward. I want to slather it all over my body. And you can't do that with film. You can in theater. You can have a good night. And there have been some nights in the theater that are famous, like Olivier doing Othello. You know that story?
No.
Well, one night, and he was the last white actor to play Othello, which to me is a disgrace. I think that political correctness is disgusting, and if I'm not allowed to play Othello because I'm not black, then who's playing the Merchant of Venice, right, other than a Jew? And that's what actors are for. Actors represent everybody. And so when you're in the theater, you feel it. And one night, Olivier was in the groove, and he was already giving a performance that was so incredible. He had lowered his voice an octave and a half and still had the range that he normally would have, so that he was able to modulate the voice, even though it was an artificial lowering from his normal kind of tenor to a baritone. And you heard him, "My most noble and approved good masters, it is true I love Desdemona." And he made it work like fucking gangbusters. And one night, he was so good that actors in the show were calling their friends all over London and saying, "Get your ass over to the theater, it's happening." And Olivier, in fact, gave this performance, and Roddy McDowell was a friend of mine, and he was there that night, and he said he was so good that he forgot. He had been hired by Life magazine to take pictures because he was a great photographer, and he just forgot to lift the camera up to his eyes because he was like mesmerized. Comes out for the curtain call, takes the call, walks off stage to the very dressing room that some 20, 30 years later I lived in, and you had to drag me out of there with dogs because I would not allow myself to use any other dressing room. And he slams the door, and all of a sudden you hear cursing, furniture slamming against walls, and they thought Olivier had gone insane. And they started to bang on the door. Larry, Larry, what's the matter? And he's cursing. Bang, crash, crash. And they finally got the door open. He threw the door open, and there he was. Tears are streaming down his face. Snot is coming out of his nose. And he says, I know I was brilliant. I don't know how I did it. And that's in the groove. And you've all had that. You've all known this experience where you're aware of it, and you know that if you pay too close attention, it'll go away. And if you don't pay any attention, it'll go away. So you just got to be aware and let it happen, because you know the muse is in the room. And I take full credit. If I am ever in the groove, I take credit. And I had a friend once in a show with me, and he was great down at the taper. And I said, boy, were you great tonight? And he said, it wasn't me, it was the muse. I said, fuck the muse. When you're bad, is it the muse? And I'm serious. Learn to take credit. And one of the great frailties of mankind is that we don't know how to compliment ourselves. If you say to someone, you're an asshole and you're a pig and you're this and that, people will go. But if you say, you're the most generous, kind-hearted person I've ever known, and what you said to that girl was so right, people, and remember that I'm saying this because you'll see it, the person you're talking to will go, as if you've been spitting at them. Because we're all so filled with self-loathing that we can't take a compliment. And one of the great things about being a smart actor is that you know how high the nobility of your work can be to show mankind a true picture of himself is hard and embarrassing and glorious. To be able to say, she expresses joy the way I wish I could, or he loves the way I do. When an audience comes into a play, you can't imagine how hard their part of the work is. They're doing a lot of work making that work. In the movies, you don't have to do that hard of work because of the magical nature of film and because we are so in love with film that we forgive it all the time. In the old days when the Red Sea parted with Charlton Heston, you saw all the ropes and all the, the marionette strings, and you forgave because you wanted to go with believing it. Now the science of film has gotten so great, you don't see that. So there's nothing to forgive. And you can actually believe you're in a time machine and you've gone back to Sinai and God is talking to Moses. And in our lifetime, you will see Meryl Streep's Hamlet. She'll be 30 years dead, and they'll release Meryl Streep's Hamlet. And you'll see the entire Battle of Gettysburg. And each soldier will be individually drawn and individually so well drawn that you won't believe they're not human. And that's film's magic. It also leaves a lot of actors out of work. And I once was going to go and tape Meryl, Al Pacino, Robert De Niro, just tape 15 minutes of them reading, put it in a drawer. Because I knew that sooner or later they were going to need their voices to do Hamlet.
Right.
And then I realized by that time they'd have so much of their voices they wouldn't need to get it from me. So I'm not going to make any money, so why should I do it?
Yeah. Okay,
Thank you.
next. Yeah, line up, line up.
And you better take advantage of me, because if you don't get it by now, I'm telling you the truth. That's what I will tell you, and you're not going to get that from everybody, so get your hands in the air.
Exactly. Then they go home and say, oh, I wish I asked them.
Yeah, because the world is a different, and for an actor, much less of a place than I am.
Hello, I'm a 2-year acting student at New York Film Academy, and I wanted to ask, because certain times when I perform, I feel, especially when I feel like I've done the role well, I have this confusion in my head where I feel if I did the role well, that must mean that that wasn't too much of a challenge for me. So how do you know, as it, because, you hear people talking outside and you hear other people talking. If an actor performs a role that he plays so well, and the role feels like that is him playing it, oh, he's not that much of a good actor because he's just playing himself. So how do you, like come together and think in your head that this is the perfect role for me?
First of all, I hate the word challenge. I'm very lazy, and I like things to be easy. And just because it's easy or hard doesn't mean that it isn't capable of greatness. That all depends. I seriously don't like challenges. I like ideas that come to me creatively and I go, wow, I know that'll work, and wow, easy. But if I was going to try to describe a process, the only way I could do it, and it won't make sense, is that I can see my performance across the room like a suit of clothes. And it's my job to walk across the room, get into that suit of clothes, and make it fit. And I've always felt that Richard, most of the people I know wear themselves as if they've been fitted very well by a good tailor. I buy my clothes off the rack, and I feel that way. I feel like, and then the metaphor somehow works for me that Dick Cheney or whoever is over there, and I'm gonna walk across the room and get into his clothes. And I know it because I've been Dick Cheney. And I can't really describe it in any other way except when you're good, and when you're serving the right master. If you're working in a film, you're not the center of the universe. If there is a center of the universe, it's the director, and even he's sharing that space. If you're an actor, you are by the nature of the art, collaborative. And it's how well you do that. I know an actor who is brilliant, but who will never let himself look as if he's been defeated, even if he's playing a defeated man. And so there are times when he works, he doesn't make any sense because he's not willing to be defeated. And it's a macho thing, I guess, but it's led him to some really stupid places. And you've got to be willing to be naked, to be completely humble or arrogant, but to be arrogant means that you have to be humble. And to be powerful sometimes means that you're going to play something that you don't personally experience because you feel powerless, but you're going to sell it anyway. Or vice versa. You have to play a submissive, and you are a guy like any one of the guys who runs the studios who, they just have never made a mistake in their lives. Like, if you say that they have, they go, "What, you crazy?" And if you say that to an actor who's about to play the Hunchback of Notre Dame, you know he's got a problem because he's got to play someone who's a submissive. If you're honest with yourself, which is, oddly enough, a requirement in this art form, you'll find it. You'll find the necessary starting point. And there's something that you have to know about film that is rarely expressed now. And you can find it in a book called Magic and the Myth of the Movies, written in the 30s. And it's about the phenomena of entering a darkened room with a vaulted ceiling and looking up at a hyper reality, a color that is more colorful than real, at perfect people who never say or They speak in completed sentences, and they tell a story in a method that is more closely familiar to you as your dream state. That's what editing is. Editing allows time to be jumped, to go backwards, to go forwards, to get close, to get far. And it all makes sense as it does in your dreams. And there's no culture in the world that teaches a class in the language of film, because you're born with it. You're born knowing the language of master, close-up, perspective, point of view. You were born with it, whether you're an Eskimo or you're from Nigeria. That's why Eskimos and Nigerians have scripts that they want to direct. And it is why film is such a universal art form, and it's why it's not an art, it's a virus. I mean, it's so overtaken other art forms that it's like an illness. And it all starts in this town where you get to live, where it's not untrue to say, if you work hard, really hard, for maybe 2 years, you can make $1 billion. And when that's true, however rare, hold on to your souls, because you'll end up one day with your best friend's knife in your neck, and your knife bloody over the body of your mother. You'll do a lot of things, because here is the only town in the world that actually delivers on the curse or the promise of that. You can actually do it. And I can't tell you, I have been surrounded my entire life by friends who live in utter denial of reality and who say, I want to have a meeting this afternoon with some dentists from Utah, and they're going to make a pool of money and we're going to make film. And I say, how many of these meetings have you had? Over 100. And have any of them ever happened? No. But I'm going to go to this one. This will happen. And that's why I left. because people believe in Nazi things.
All right, the next one.
Thank you.
Remember, the suit is there and you walk into the suit. This image is so strong, I feel like I can act. Honestly.
You can. I spent years saying, and then. That's the way she said it. And we were going there, and then.
Go ahead.
As an actor who's worked with some of the great directors, I was wondering if you could discuss the process beforehand and during the shooting of a film with the director.
Well, most directors don't. Most directors don't work with actors anymore. They're too busy at Video Village. And no director that I'm aware of, except one, has ever bothered to take an acting class. Except unless they started out being actors. And those few directors that do involve themselves, Stephen does, for the most part, when a director casts a film, he thinks his job is over in terms of acting. Anything the cast actor does is okay. And that's not right, because an actor is not the best judge of his own work. And he's not keeping the whole in his head. He needs a director, as the director needs the actor. And that's one of the many, many things that no longer is in the right priority. It's not acting, writing of character, prose, storyline that are the first priorities, the first tools of a director. Now it's special effects and blue screen and car crashes, and then a plot, which you've seen before, and character development, which is nil. And one of the things I know about myself is if I was young now, I would not want to be an actor because there's no reward.
Well, there's independent films.
Yeah, there are. There are. And even in Auschwitz, you could actually have sunlight coming in through a window. Yes, that's true. There are rewards, but are there great roles? Are there great roles written by great writers so that you relish playing them? Very few. And that's the biggest difference between now and then. And I'm an egomaniac. So if I was growing up today, I would say I would pick something else, because even to succeed at acting in today's world is to achieve fame and celebrity, which is to great acting as plastic is to steel. I mean, there's no comparison. Celebrity is the stupidest ambition on earth. And the only good thing about it is that you never have to wait in line at a restaurant. And everything else about it sucks. And you can't get off as an artist, as an actor in film today. And of course, you can all give me the exception, but that's what they are. They're exceptions. And in the old days, let me tell you something. If you made a film with John Ford, every part from John Wayne down was great. Even the guys who had one line, they were great because the writers were great and they were telling great stories. And nowadays, if you're not telling the story of car thieves and blood splatter, you're telling it car thieves and blood splatter as teenagers, or you're telling teenage angst disguised as werewolves and vampires. I mean, come on. The problem is that there's a phrase that is usually associated with politics, or used to be, and it's a phrase, capable of honor. And it was my lodestar as a child. I was entering an art form that was capable of honor. And when I was 15, 16 years old, I saw John Gielgud come to the Huntington Art Fair and prove it. And now, you've got to go back and get the videotape of John Gielgud doing his performance at the Hartford in 1952. And you're not surrounded by great art. And you're not surrounded by the boundaries that censorship and puritanical thinking forced the creation of great art. And that's, that's the invisible consequence of censorship, is the creation of great films.
Thank you.
Next. Oh my God, long line.
I don't have a question, I just have a thank you. I worked on Nuts many years ago. I was one of the loonies in the Looney House. And I had a very small little scene with Miss Streisand. And I was kind of shaking, having to work with her. And you were standing right behind me. And you put your hand on my shoulder and you said, remember, she needs you as much as you need her. And my lines came out beautifully and I did really good. Thank you.
Wow.
Hi. I was just wondering what type of techniques you studied, and out of those, what did you find most helpful for helping develop the character for the films and even on stage?
I was never a formally trained actor, and when I say formally, I mean neither physically, vocally, or with any particular method. I was just an actor. I just did. And I acted at Theater West with people who never asked those questions. They just got jobs and acted. And then I also acted at Actors Studio, which had an ideology of acting. And I was once asked in London who was the most damaging cultural icon. And I said, without a hesitation, Lee Strasberg. And for very real reasons. Lee Strasberg was so persuasive in giving to actors the single ambition of empowering the common man that the writers bought it. And all of a sudden, you could not have the Philadelphia story. You couldn't have Philip Barry. You couldn't have the stories of American history. You had to tell the stories of the common man, which are great stories, but that's not the only story in America. And so I think that Lee Strasberg was a hideously damaging creature. And he also had a weakness for girls with big breasts, which distorted his critique. And I'm not, in fact, that's actually something that truly, really did color our lives, colored American lives, and is still doing it. And those are the invisible things that change us from one kind of person to another. And it's why, women have had it tough from the beginning. Lee didn't make it any easier because Lee loved girls with big breasts and encouraged them and didn't encourage anybody else. And so, and even, when Brando was asked, he would finally say, I'm not a Lee Strasberg actor, I'm a Stella Adler actor. And Stella Adler and Lee Strasberg had it out. They came to blows over all this because she went and studied with Stanislavski and came back and said, what you're doing is not what he's doing. And they duked it out. And it was, a major change in the 20th century and a major shift in our culture.
All right, next question. We have a long
Thank you.
line and you're ready.
Good afternoon, Mr. Dreyfuss.
Hi.
How you doing? As an Oscar winner, I'd like to get to know what is your opinion on how much % of the Oscar win or nomination goes to the actor, and what % goes to the screenwriters and directors?
The better the material, the better you have a shot at being great, obviously. And so you're not going to get the reputation of being a good actor if all you've got to work with is, if that's it, then no one's going to be nominated. You need great acting. Great acting needs great writing. Shakespeare is taught in every single school district in the country. And we all know, if we're telling the truth, you've never really seen a totally successful production of any single Shakespeare play. I mean, you might have seen an 80% successful. Most of them are about 40. And the only reason we study Shakespeare is because actors love to play him. And actors should love to play him because he is the genius. He's more than that. He's uncannily brilliant. But to an audience, most of Shakespeare is completely unacceptable, and I don't know what the hell he just said. But actors who are on the other side, and they know because they've studied it, they don't want to give it up. So it stays central to our education. But the most successful production of any Shakespeare I've ever seen was Peter Wood's Midsummer Night's Dream, which was incredible, except for the 20% that was shit. And you can't get around it. Shakespeare I could do 2 hours on it. But the only reason he's still played is because actors are so passionate about presenting it and playing it. And I would ask, if I was like running a school, I'd have 2 questions formally asked. And the questions are the ones you've already asked about history and about Shakespeare. Why the hell are we studying this crap? And I'd have them answer that as freshmen and then ask it again as seniors and see the difference in the answers. If you haven't come to understand why we study this crap in the 4 years you have of high school, then the school has failed you and you have failed yourself. Because history and Shakespeare are wells of wealth that have no bottom. And the only possible way you can possibly know how humans behave is by studying history and acting. And so Hamlet is as revolutionary a play as our nation is a revolutionary country. And I'm not saying a new country, I'm saying a revolutionary country. They didn't kill Jesus because he was a preacher. They killed Jesus because he was a revolutionary. They killed Napoleon for the same reason. And they would have killed us if they could have gotten their hands on us. But they couldn't. And so, when you're studying all this, there are really connective tissues that make all this make sense. And history and Shakespeare and American Revolutionary, whatever, all connect up. And then if you're really lucky, you'll have some great teachers who will wrap it up for you and call it evolution. And evolution is as beautiful, as detailed, as complex as Shakespeare. And Shakespeare is as beautiful and complex and detailed as human history. And all of them are taught because we are under compulsion to do so. We could not avoid that compulsion. That's evolution.
Thank you very much.
I don't know that we can do all those people, there are like 10 people.
Just let's start paying cash.
Hi, good afternoon, Mr. Dreyfuss. My name is Pakita, and I'm a one-year filmmaking student. And one thing I've learned so far is that filmmaking is 100% collaboration. And like my favorite part so far of attending this school is casting. And casting really great talent. I've met a lot of great people, good talent at this school that I want to carry on with me throughout my career. So my question to you is, how many people have you stayed in contact with and kept in your life and your career through this long star-studded career that you've had? And how important was it to keep these people in your life, and how did they influence your career?
Actually, very few. Until I was 27, I didn't have a friend who wasn't an actor. After I was 27, I didn't have a friend who was. And when you're my therapist, I'll tell you all about that. But most people will tell you that the friends that they keep closest to them are the ones that they made when they were this big. And before all the hoopla began. And that's really true of a majority of people that you'll be studying or admiring in your life. It's not the ones you make as adults that matter. It's the ones that you carry with you from childhood, who know you and love you for what you are, no matter what. Because, you know, stardom, especially in America, can really do some pretty melodramatic change in your character.
All right. Maybe the next two, and then we have to really wrap it up. I'm sorry, guys. Yes.
Hi.
Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Felipe. My question is, I guess in a world where people have so many opinions about what you should do or should not do, or what you did right or wrong, how, as an actor, do you keep your own sense of self and yet please people that are expecting a specific performance from you?
Well, first, the Greeks had a phrase. The reason for education, they would say, was to achieve the agile mind, the mobile mind that could take whatever life throws at them. And you don't have to be an expert at everything, but you've got to be on your toes and ready for life. And that's true of acting, it's true of everything. You have to be intellectually open. You have to be willing to say a phrase that for most people is so difficult that it's like, one of my kids says, I'd rather have a nail driven through the palm of my hand before I said the phrase, I don't know. Because people don't say, I don't know. You have to say, I don't know, if you have any rational sense of the world, because you can't know everything. And as an actor, you're always learning something about people. I mean, you learn something every time you read the newspaper, you learn something every time you go to a movie, you learn something every time you're in the audience. I was in the audience for the documentary that they made, that Michael Moore made about Bush. And some weeks later on The View, one of the girls on The View said, I heard that Richard Dreyfuss was going to play Dick Cheney, but I know he's not because he's a liberal. And I saw him watching the Michael Moore film, and he was crying. He was crying. He couldn't even stand up. He'll never play Dick Cheney. So I played Dick Cheney. I went on the show, and I said, so you really feel I could never play Dick Cheney, huh? Such an ass. And you got to be open to these things and ready, especially as an actor. Because as an actor, you're not first. You're fourth. You're third. If you're lucky, you're first for a while. But you're not, it's not built in. Every time I have a friend who teaches a screenwriting class at Harvard, and he's asked me to substitute for him every once in a while. And I'll say, how many people here want to be screenwriters? And they all raise their hand. How many people here want to be directors? Half of them. And I say, anyone here who wants to be only a screenwriter has the ambition to be fourth. And that's a pretty despicable ambition, because there are at least 3 people above you who can shit all over your work. So if you want to be in the movie business, don't just want to be a writer. Want to be a director, because they have more inherent power. And as an actor, I say the same thing. You know, you're an actor. You bring yourself to the character. And then some schmuck of a director or some producer from, I don't know, Togoland, who made a fortune in white slavery, is telling you how to do the role. And you've got to learn to say, shut up, sir. Or do it the way he wants. Or do both and figure out the human way of doing what he wants and making it real, which is a real tough thing to do. But it's power. It's all about the real interplay of human power. On a film set, it's no different than, you know, the cabinet meetings of the British Parliament. It's not different. You have to negotiate everything. And you have to take into consideration that not only can he be the stupidest person who has ever walked the face of the earth, but because he's the producer, he gets to say the final word, even though he's an idiot, or you are, because you could be wrong. And there are times in my life when I have been driving down the 405 freeway 2 years after I finished a film and gone, oh shit, that's how I should have done it. And, you know, you want those to be as few as possible, but that'll happen. You gotta be smart. You gotta be open to being stupid. You gotta try to be smarter on Tuesday than you were on Monday. And you've got to be graceful. You gotta work with people. There was a period of time in my life when I was a schmuck. And there was a far greater period of time when I was the nicest guy in the world and people liked to work with me. and that's a better place. And I say that because it's a more pretty way to live. My mom used to say, it takes an extra erg of energy to be an asshole. And it's true. It's just easier to be nice. And when you're nice, and you're nice to yourself, and nice to your friends, it's an easier, more graceful way of living. If you're imposing yourself all the time in people's faces, and you're gonna do it my way, you butts. He doesn't like that stuff. You get the feeling he's got a list.
I want to ask you about the iconic Apple commercial, Think Different, that you did the voice over. I want to show it to the students because I want to show them what a great voiceover is, because I cannot imagine anybody else doing it. Can we hit it?
Here's to the crazy ones, the misfits, the rebels, the troublemakers, the round pegs in the square holes, the ones who see things differently. They're not fond of rules, and they have no respect for the status quo. You can quote them, disagree with them, glorify or vilify them. About the only thing you can't do is ignore them. Because they change things. They push the human race forward. And while some may see them as the crazy ones, we see genius. Because the people who are crazy enough to think they can change the world are the ones who do.
I like the part.
I'll tell you something. When Gilbert did The Ages of Man, we had all gone to the theater that day to make fun of him. He was a has-been, and we were there. We were all young, hot American schmuck. Anyway, this guy walks out on stage, opens up his mouth, and I completely bifurcated these two different people. One of them was still sitting with his friends, and the other one was in awe. True awe. I've learned as I got older that I'm much more accessible to my emotions. So I was in awe of what a human voice could do, given the right prose, given the right language, to submit to. And when this came my way, I said, I want this even if I have to kill people. And I wanted to say it, and I wanted to represent it, and I still do. And it was an honor then, and it's an honor now.
And we think that you're one of those crazy people that they're talking about. So, and I want to say something. I called Richard, who I know for a long time, to wish him happy birthday about, 10 days ago. And then I said, listen, I hear that you're coming into town tonight. He's interviewing Chris Matthews about a book that he wrote about JFK. And I said, I really would love it if you can come a little earlier and give a lecture to, to our students. And everybody else would have said, oh, it's such a long drive. I have to come from San Diego, and then I have to go back to San Diego, and tomorrow he's going to Utah. But he said he would come, and he's here. There was no if, there was no but, there was not, I know that I promised, but I'm not coming. It was a commitment, and he honored that commitment. And for that, I want you to see why an actor becomes a star, and why a star is an actor at the level that he is. Because when you give your word, you keep it. And that is